All right, let's jump straight into this explainer. Today, we are going to unpack the absolutely wild, century-long saga of two of the most iconic names in automotive history, Rolls-Royce and Bentley. It is a story of fierce rivals who were essentially forced into a secret marriage, only to later go through one of the most spectacular multi-million-dollar corporate divorces the business world has literally ever seen. We're talking corporate espionage, forbidden romance, jet engine bankruptcies, and a seriously high-stakes billionaire bidding war. But to really get how these two titans eventually clashed, we gotta go right back to the start. Think about this for a second. How on earth did a destitute newspaper boy and a wealthy, thrill-seeking aristocrat actually team up to spark what would become a billion-dollar corporate war? It's the ultimate odd couple origin story, and it planted the seeds for absolutely everything that followed. Picture this. On one hand, you've got Henry Royce. His family went completely bankrupt when he was just 4 years old. And by age 9, he was literally selling newspapers on the freezing streets of London just to survive. With only a single year of formal schooling, the guy taught himself engineering from borrowed textbooks. Then, on the other hand, you have Charles Rolls, a wealthy, Cambridge-educated aristocrat who owned a luxury car dealership and was totally obsessed with the dangerous, adrenaline-fueled new world of motor racing. Well, in 1904, at the Midland Hotel in Manchester, these two complete opposites finally met. See, Royce had just built this absolutely flawless two-cylinder car, and when Charles Rolls slid behind the wheel, he was basically speechless. The car didn't vibrate, it didn't stutter, and it started on the very first pull. Charles went straight back to London and delivered this now legendary verdict: "I have found the greatest motor engineer in the world." Right then and there, they agreed that Rolls would exclusively sell every single car Royce built. It was this perfect combination of pure engineering genius and high society marketing. And that agreement set up a core dynamic for the entire industry. Rolls-Royce became the ultimate symbol of peerless, unattainable luxury. To put their refinement into perspective, they could place a brimful glass of water on a running engine without spilling a single drop. Meanwhile, a guy named W.O. Bentley was out there building his own brand. But Bentley was all about thrilling, Le Mans-winning performance, using these highly innovative aluminum pistons he developed during World War I. Fun fact, Ian Fleming's original James Bond actually drove a Bentley. It was considered the ultimate high-performance, silent sports car. Section 1. The Secret Love Mascot, the Scandal Behind the Hood Ornament. Now, the human drama behind the metal here is just fascinating. It's like a real-life soap opera. Back in 1902, this pioneer of the automobile movement, Lord Montagu, fell deeply in love with his secretary, Eleanor Thornton, but because she was impoverished and he was married, their affair had to be kept a total secret. So Montagu commissions a sculptor, Charles Sykes, to create a personal hood ornament for his Rolls-Royce called the Whisper, which was modeled after Eleanor with a finger pressed to her lips. Then, in 1911, Rolls-Royce asked Sykes for an official mascot, and he evolved that exact design into the famous Spirit of Ecstasy, once again modeled on Eleanor. Tragically, in 1915, Eleanor died when her ship was torpedoed by a U-boat. So to this day, every single Rolls-Royce carries the ghost of their forbidden romance right there on the hood. Section 2. The Sneaky Bentley Buyout. Corporate Espionage in the 1930s. So fast forward a bit, by 1931, Bentley's amazing racing triumphs just couldn't save them from the Great Depression, and they end up in receivership. A rival engineering company named Napier attempts to swoop in with a rescue buyout. But suddenly, this completely mysterious entity called the British Central Equitable Trust swoops in with a higher winning bid. The massive twist? That trust was entirely a secret front for Rolls-Royce. They literally bought out their main rival in complete secrecy just to kill the competition. They completely blindsided W.O. Bentley, who didn't even know what had happened until the ink was completely dry. The wild part here is that these two bitter rivals were now essentially forced into a marriage, sharing adapted engines and chassis for the next 70 years. But surprisingly, Rolls-Royce's badge engineering actually produced a phenomenal vehicle. Even W.O. Bentley himself, despite having his entire company snatched right out from under him, had to admit, taking all things into consideration, I would rather own this Bentley than any other car produced under that name. Section 3. Aviation Triumphs and Bankruptcy. The jet engine that broke the bank. Now, you've got to remember that Rolls-Royce had an unbelievable track record outside of just making luxury cars. I mean, they supplied these literally indestructible armored cars for Lawrence of Arabia, who famously said a Rolls in the desert was above rubies. They built 166,000 of the legendary Merlin Aero engines during World War II.
But in the late 1960s, they started developing this incredibly complex RB211 high-bypass turbofan jet engine. It had this revolutionary but super risky triple-spool design, and the development costs just absolutely skyrocketed. They doubled to the point where the cost to actually make the engine was literally higher than its selling price. And that financial black hole triggered a catastrophic collapse. In 1971, Rolls-Royce went totally bankrupt. Because the jet engine business was just too strategically important to fail, the British government actually stepped in, nationalized the company, and saved the RB211 project. But as you can imagine, the government really didn't want to be in the business of selling luxury cars. So in 1973, they formally divorced the car makers from the jet engine makers, spinning the automotive side off into a completely separate entity called Rolls-Royce Motors. Section 4. The Great German Bidding War. The Spectacular Corporate Divorce. All right, jump forward with me to 1998. The company Vickers had owned Rolls-Royce Motors since 1980, but now they wanted to sell. BMW seemed like the absolute shoo-in for this. They were already supplying engines and components for Rolls-Royce and Bentley cars anyway. So who actually managed to walk away with the ultimate prize? No way, right? It was Volkswagen. VW sweeps in with this massive, earth-shattering bid of roughly $537 million, which entirely outbid BMW's offer of $425 million. At the time, it seemed like a total, flawless victory for Volkswagen, grabbing complete control of both of these British luxury icons. But wait, here is the absolute biggest twist of this entire explainer. Volkswagen spent a literal fortune, but they missed a massive, gaping legal loophole. They bought the factories, they bought the designs, but they didn't actually buy the Rolls-Royce brand name itself. Remember that corporate split we just talked about back in 1973? Well, the Aero engine company, Rolls-Royce plc, retained actual ownership of the Rolls-Royce name and that famous R logo. And it just so happens they had a joint venture going with BMW. So they slyly turn around and license the Rolls-Royce name and logo to BMW for just £40 million. That's an absolute steal compared to what VW just paid for the rest of it. So the reality of this 1998 stalemate was stark and honestly kinda hilarious. VW had the Bentley name, the historic Crew factory, the Spirit of Ecstasy mascot, and the rights to the Rolls-Royce grille shape. But BMW owned the actual Rolls-Royce name and logo. Plus, BMW had a huge trick up its sleeve. They supplied the engines for the cars VW was currently building, and their contract allowed them to terminate that supply with just 12 months' notice. So both of these titans literally held exactly half of a car company. Obviously, they couldn't stay like that forever. They were forced into a high-stakes compromise to settle this spectacular divorce. BMW agrees to keep supplying engines temporarily so VW wouldn't just go under right away. In exchange, VW agreed that starting in 2003, they would exclusively use the Bentley name. BMW would then take full control of Rolls-Royce motor cars, though they had to build a brand new factory in Goodwood entirely from scratch, while VW got to keep the historic Crew factory for Bentley. Section 5. Two distinct luxury kings. The legacy lives on. And that brings us to today. The incredible thing is, both brands have perfectly reclaimed their starkly contrasting original souls. Under VW, Bentley leans heavily back into W.O. Bentley's original vision, fully embracing its motorsport history with the handling and performance-oriented Continental GT. Meanwhile, under BMW, Rolls-Royce is right back to what Henry Royce and Charles Rolls demanded way back in 1904, focusing entirely on pureless, absolutely unattainable luxury and a serenely relaxing ride with amazing models like the Phantom. It really is an incredible journey, stretching all the way back to that very first meeting at the Midland Hotel. And it leaves us with this final, crazy thought to ponder. If Rolls-Royce hadn't executed that super sneaky corporate buyout during the Great Depression, would Bentley have simply vanished into history? Instead, this dramatic, century-long corporate soap opera actually preserved two of the greatest automotive legends the world has ever known. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and honestly, I hope you never look at that Spirit of Ecstasy hood ornament the exact same way again.